In our last trending talk today, before our enlightening exchange, I'd like to invite a long-term friend of the show on stage. He has dedicated his career to transforming how companies innovate, and that is renowned and author and award-winning corporate innovation expert and associate partner at Strategizer, Tendai Vicky. Tendai has 3 influential books under his belt, including his latest, Pirates in the Navy. His work is celebrated globally, notably for co-developing an award-winning innovation framework at Pearson. And you can also find his insights on innovation and business strategy in Forbes, where he's a regular contributor. Today, Tendai will be complementing our symphony with an instrument that really lays the foundation for innovation: collaboration. He'll show you how to work with key functions such as finance, human resources, legal, and compliance, and why it takes a village to innovate. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Tendai.
Hey, thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. And I remember when we first started writing the corporate startup with my friend and colleague Dan Tomer over there, and also with Esther Hans, and it was interesting because at that time we were just like pulling at threads in the lean startup movement and trying to weave together a tapestry of what it might look like inside large organizations. And it was kind of difficult. And then you fast forward 7 years, 8 years later, and all the conversations that are happening at this conference just show how far we've gone. And so a lot of the conversations around methodology and technique and how to invest and all that, the technical conversation has gone really, really far. What hasn't gone that far is that every single time I've tried to do this work, the thing that breaks the work are the human beings, the people that are involved, their psychology, the way they behave and conduct themselves. This is what's really, really difficult about the work now. And I think it's something that we really need to start confronting directly. Like, how do you deal with the human relationship side of driving corporate innovation? And one of my favorite stories is a story by Steve Blank, where he writes this post about how he went to a company that was giving one of those innovation awards. And the award was called the Hero Award, right? They call them innovation heroes. And the Hero Award was given to the innovator who was able to survive all the corporate obstacles and launch something. They're like, wow, you're amazing. Like, we tried to make you fail and we couldn't. So here is your Hero Award, right? Which is absolutely insane. But when I was reading that, it reminded me of a phraseology that we had used at Strategizer when we were evaluating a Swiss company. And I was like, oh, wow, look at that. Great minds think alike. Me and Steve Blank, that is. Because this is an example of a slide that we actually gave to this company. This is I've sort of scrubbed the name of the company, but this is exactly what it actually looked like. And at that time, we had called their innovators the hero innovators because it takes so much effort for them to actually become successful. One of the things that this company needed to do, and this is an interesting one, right? If you wanted to work on something new, you were not allowed to go to speak to your leaders until you convinced one other colleague to work with you on it. So first you had to convince your colleague to work with you on it, then together you go convince your line manager. And then after that you can complete the 35-page form. Then you can start. So they had to jump through a lot of obstacles, complex bureaucracy, documentation, right? And they were really proud of this because they called it their participatory culture. In a participatory culture, you don't just start working on things on your own. But the participatory culture wasn't really participatory if the other participant is your boss, right? It's not really participatory. And so these were all the things that people were really struggling with, you know? They spent more time on documentation than doing the work. The innovation work was more about satisfying internal stakeholders than it was about meeting customer needs. And I remember having a conversation with one of the guys there, and he actually said to me, you can innovate if you're like me, and you don't care about your career. Like, that's the only way you can innovate inside this organization. And so the conversation was about lowering those obstacles. And Steve Blank concludes his post by saying, at the end of the Innovation Award ceremony, everybody they gave themselves a big dap, like, oh, this is really cool, and everybody walked away. And nobody had the most important conversation, which is, should we really be having this award? Why is it so hard to do innovation inside our companies? Should we not be lowering the obstacles that this person is facing, rather than giving them an award for jumping over the obstacles? Right? Nobody's having that conversation. And so what I really want us to think about is whether we really need our innovators to be heroes. Like, we don't need another hero. I feel like Tina Turner right now. I could just burst out into a song. We don't need another hero, right? The heroes are already inside the organization. What we really need to do is just to lower the barriers for them to collaborate. And I remember one of my most kind of controversial, slightly infamous keynotes at Innovators was the one where I was chastising everyone in the room for having big egos, for thinking they're Elon Musk, and all of that. I don't know whether you've ever seen that one, where I'm like, you're not Elon Musk, and you don't work in a company full of idiots. And so the question becomes, if we're not Elon Musk and we don't work in a company full of idiots, how do we actually collaborate together? Because there's no chance for innovation to succeed if you're working on your own. You have zero chance of success. The conversations that often happen, do you like a corporate, do you like the accelerator? Do you want an incubator? Do you want to do open innovation? Do you want to yada, yada, yada? Like, cool, pick a technique. Whatever technique you choose, you cannot succeed without collaborating with your leaders in the core business, regardless. So the human beings that are going to do the work are really, really, really important. And that's why it takes a village to innovate. And one of the major reasons it takes a village to innovate is ideas are a dime a dozen. What really matters is transforming those ideas into successful businesses out into the world. We're not in the business of creation, ideation, hackathoning, right? We're in the business of using those instruments to put things out into the world. And of course, it's a crazy process. Some things will fail, some things will succeed. But you're going to have some conversations. You might have to say to the sales guy, can I do some testing? And the sales director will be like, no one is allowed to talk to customers except my sales team. Right? You're going to have to go to IT and say, can I build a prototype? They're going to go, great, you're on the backlog for 6 months. Right? You're going to have to go to all these places so you can open out the actual work. Or you can say to yourself, no, I'm going to open an innovation lab. We're going to have a separate building in a separate country, on a separate planet, with no MBAs. And then you're going to work on your stuff, and then when you bring it back to try and scale it, nobody's going to give you any resource to scale. Because the CFO will be like, sorry, it is not on our financial roadmap. Right? So you can view all of these collaborators as obstacles if you want. You can view them as obstacles, you can treat them like obstacles if you want. But if you really think about it, you can also think about them as superpowers. And this is the psychological reframe that I would love for all the innovation folks to start to have in their minds. All of these obstacles are actually superpowers. If you think about the comparison between a startup and a large organization, all the problems that you have in your large organization, a startup would like to have. How many of you ever heard the phrase, a startup is like a mosquito? You never heard that one before? A startup is like a mosquito. You get one shot. And if the person does this, you're dead. Right? So that's really important. Like, a startup is like a mosquito, so you get all the agility in the world, but you die easily. That's why venture capitalists invest in a whole bunch of them, because they know that some of them are just going to die. Whereas when you're a large organization, you have some advantages. One advantage is the brand. You can leverage your brand, but only if you get permission to do it, of course. Right? But when you're a startup, you're virtually unknown. Some of the resources that you have in terms of human talent and teams and support from key functions and even financial resources are sometimes larger than startups. Right? We often hear about the NVIDIA, sorry, not the NVIDIA, the OpenAI, et cetera, that have got loads of resources. Those are kind of rare, actually. Most startups I meet are broke. They're actually scrambling, trying to get stuff done. And then finally, when it comes to market, you actually have access to customers that you can start testing with. if you're inside a large organization, and most startups are really struggling to try and have these conversations, especially in B2B, it's really difficult if you're a startup working in B2B to start getting the right conversations. And so these are all superpowers. But if you don't leverage these superpowers, do you know what you are? A startup in chains. If you're an innovation team inside a large organization and you're not leveraging the superpowers, you're a startup in chains. This is a phrase that was coined by Alex Osterwalder. What does that mean? You don't have the freedoms of a real startup, and you're not leveraging the benefits of being inside the large organization. You're literally in the middle of nowhere, right? A quick conversation I had, this is a TD Ameritrade, they were acquired by Schwab. When they brought me in to try and help them, and I was in Omaha talking to them, they told me that when they first opened their innovation lab, they used to call themselves the home for homeless ideas, right? If your idea is homeless and nobody in the company wants to work on it, bring it to us. We'll help you. We're the home for homeless ideas. And then the guy says to me, do you know what we discovered when we were working with these teams? Is if your idea is homeless when it comes to us, it is homeless when it leaves, right? And so you're still a startup in chains. The only thing that unlocks these chains is the village, right? That's the only thing that unlocks these chains if you're working inside a large organization. And so let's just do a quick 2-minute chat. So just talk to your neighbor for 2 minutes and tell them which key function in your organization is the hardest to work with when it comes to innovation. Just quickly, like. Okay, time. They won't let me stay up here for long. They're already trying to get me to stop. Ah, thank you, that's awesome. Okay, shut up. All right, thank you everyone. That's a wonderful conversation. Can somebody just shout some functions? Just shout. IT. Legal. Finance, sales, HR, right, exactly. So all of these, well, that's not pretty much every function. So that doesn't really help us, but okay. Well, let's try and cover 3 of them today. Let's try, you can work with any one of these functions, right? But let's just try and cover 3 of them and see how we can help them, how we can help work collaboratively, finance, legal, and HR. And some of these stories you've heard before, but what I want you to think about is the human side of the conversation, how the humans were actually collaborating. So let's start with finance. And I've started calling all these folks entrepreneurial CFO, the entrepreneurial CHRO, so that they can feel really good about themselves. So let's start with the entrepreneurial CFO. The entrepreneurial CFO's job is to remove business case as a requirement for early stage innovation. You have to get them to agree to that. If you can't get them to agree to that, you have problems all the way. And then you have to get them to agree to set up a system for making metered funding or incremental investments in ideas. These are structures that you have to get them to actually agree to. And then you have to get them to allocate and protect investments in innovation. Right? These are the human conversations that you actually have to have. So when we were working at Pearson, and you heard about the award-winning framework that we created, what we did was we spent months and months and months having meetings upon meetings with the CFO and the senior vice presidents of finance. And the conversation was driven by this one question. How much money would you be willing to invest in an idea that doesn't give you a business case or promise you a return? And the first weeks of those conversations were like, we are never going to do that here. And then you have to kind of like psychologically start working through it and go, but if you never do that and people complete business cases, how many promises have been made in those business cases that have ever worked out for you? And once you ask a finance person that question, it's like giving them one of those chairs that the psychologists give you and you get to lie down on it and talk about your problems. Because then the finance person are like, yes, these people are always lying to us. They never meet the numbers. So I'm like, exactly. So if they're always lying to you and they never meet the numbers, imagine that you gave them a little bit of money and they had to give you evidence that the idea has traction before you gave them more money. And over time, you get to this point where they go, okay, we'll give you this much. In the first stage, you can only spend $50,000. You can't spend more than $50,000. And then in the later stage, you can spend only $250,000. That £300,000 is the upper limit. After that, we want a business case. Then you're like, okay, thank you. We'll give you the business case after, and then you can start to allocate the funds how you want. Not only that, right, but we work together with the finance teams to build the submission forms and the documents and the structure inside their systems to actually allow these investments to happen at an incremental level. But it's a tough collaboration. I used to say to Craig Strong, who I worked with, we need to go into those conversations and wait for them to shout at us for the first 30 minutes and then have a conversation after. Right? And the ability to be shouted at for the first 30 minutes is the superpower of the corporate innovator. You have to be able to take that and then have the conversation. Otherwise, if you're too vain to do that, you're not going to be successful. In another organization, we had a different problem, and you've seen this before, where they're like, yes, we get it, Tendai, we want to invest in innovation, but if I invest in innovation, it's not the same thing as investing in R&D. I can't amortize it out of my cost. If I invest in innovation, it just goes into the cost side of my P&L. So if I am being set EBITDA targets that I have to meet, how do I invest in innovation? Right? And so we did a back and forth conversation with this large organization. It's like a large Swiss family-owned organization. And then we came up with a concept that I had actually heard of before in another publishing company a few years ago, and we called it EBITDA relief, where the CFO agreed that for every dollar that is invested by any leader in innovation is not included in their EBITDA calculations, which means that the center, the corporate center, is eating that cost. So it's like, okay, that's free money. That's like when I give my children money at the playground. They're like, yay, thanks, Dad. Right? And so it freed up these leaders to start investing in innovation. But this cannot happen without a conversation at the human level. Now, sitting where you are, you could come up with many other concepts that might unlock finance for innovation, right? These are just a couple of examples that I've given you. What I'm trying to do is to move the conversation into that way of thinking. All right, let's talk about legal. The entrepreneurial chief legal officer, right? And everybody's like, those don't exist. Well, what does that actually look like? So, the one thing that they can help us with is by removing barriers to testing ideas. Right? Like all this legal and compliance stuff that we have to jump through. We want to have them apply the appropriate criteria to the right stage of innovation. Not that like no matter where the team is, everybody has to complete the same 35-page form. Right? That's important. Which means that they're literally helping us create a fast track for innovation. That's what they're helping us do. And again, this is not that original, right? I'm not talking about something new. I'm just wanting you to think about the human side of the conversation. And so this is a great post by Ulrich from Bayer, where he talks about how he worked with legal and compliance to co-create a framework for how innovation can work inside the organization. Why is it important to co-create this framework? The reason it's important to co-create this framework is because inside our companies, every conversation with legal and compliance starts from zero every time. One team negotiates access to customers, and they become successful. The next team comes, and they negotiate access to customers as if the previous team hadn't done it before, and they become successful. So everybody's starting from scratch. And what they were trying to do was to co-create a path that can allow teams to become successful by just making it automatic. And here's how it works, because I've run a couple of these workshops. You bring in legal and compliance into the room and you say to them, listen, what are all the criteria that people have to hit before you allow them to launch a product? And they go, here they are. These are our requirements. We will not let you launch anything out into the world unless you hit all these requirements. And then you say to them, okay, so during discovery, all we really want to do is learn whether customers have a real need. Which of these criteria actually apply to that? And they go, oh, is that all you're doing? We didn't know. Nobody talks to us. If that's all you're doing, then only the criteria apply. Okay, great. What if we're just launching prototypes and people are signing up, but we're not really collecting money from their cards? Well, in that case, you need those criteria plus these ones. And then at the point where we're getting ready to actually launch and scale, then you need to cover all the criteria. I've been in this workshop, and I remember the chief legal officer saying to me, he took me to a corner and was like, that's amazing. I've never been in a room with innovators in my whole life. Nobody brings me into these conversations. So that was a lot of fun. It's good for us to understand what you do. In fact, I'm going to give you a dedicated resource of 2 or 3 people that will be dedicated to running this fast track for you. And whenever a team wants to move out of these criteria, then they have to fill in the form. And that's the human conversation. And then he told me a story about how people give each other advice about how to get things past legal and compliance on email. And then they forget to delete their conversation when they send the email to legal and compliance. So he gets to read what advice they've been giving each other, right? And so that's just part of like the life that we lead when we're inside large organizations. So that's the human conversation. And so when we're working at Pearson, my colleague Craig Strong came up with this really interesting concept, and he called it PI. And this is actually the graphic we used inside the company, right? And PI is our collaboration with all the various functions inside the organization in terms of how they drive innovation. In fact, one of the things we started struggling with was we had the submission forms where people had to submit their ideas before they start getting worked at. And every one of these functions started wanting to have a section on that form. And in the end, we're like, no, we can't give you a section. What we can do is we can put you on and use like a red, amber, green status of like, have you collaborated with this key function? And then that allows us to send those folks to you, and then you can give them your form. But we're not going to put it on our form because now we're back to the 35-page business case. But it was an interesting collaboration in that sense. So I can give you all these examples, but really none of this works if you don't have an entrepreneurial CHRO. Think of every function that you have inside the organization. You can collaborate with them, but really at the heart of it all, the function that drives all these collaborations has to be the CHRO. And I was invited in South Africa once to give a keynote at the Chief Human Resource Officer Awards, where they like name the best Chief Human Resource Officer in the country. All the big multinational companies were there, and so they eventually, I think it was the Standard Bank CHRO that won the award. And my keynote started like this. Your job as human resource officers is not to do training for innovation. Like that's the least interesting thing that you can do for innovation is training, right? Your job is really to help innovation become a legitimate career path inside your companies, right? Your job is to build systems and processes that incentivize innovation. Right? Not to say, we got Tendai and Dan to come in and do a business model canvas session for us. Right? It's uninteresting. You can pat yourself on the back, but those people will never be able to use those canvases anyway, unless you do this. Right? Build bridges that allow collaboration across functions. That's what you really have to do. Because when we're talking about it takes a village, what we're talking about is cross-functional collaboration across different diverse teams. And that's really difficult because people don't really have a shared mindset around this. So how do you drive this collaboration? That's what we're talking about, is how do you help cross-functional teams collaborate? How do you create systems and processes for that? There's a really cool paper that was published by Hagedorn and Bechke more than 10 years ago, actually. It's got a really cool title. The title is When Collections of Creatives Become Creative Collectives. That's like she sells she shows by the she show. Right? It's kind of like a hard thing to say. And they did their research across these 6 organizations, McKinsey, IDEO, et cetera, and they were like interested in how people collaborate. And the concepts seem simple, but they're really, really powerful. And they came up with like these 4 steps. The first step is what we call help-seeking behavior. And that's the hard step for you in this room. You're my tribe. I know you. The help-seeking thing is really hard because you have to step out of your role and seek the help from the other functions. I need help with finance. I need help designing this. I need help with this. So the help-seeking behavior is the first trigger of the collaborative process. You have to go out there and actually seek the help. Now, that doesn't work, of course, if you don't get the help-giving behavior, which is on the other side of that. So the people you seek help from have to be willing to give you that help and drop whatever they're doing and actually help you. So help-seeking and help-giving is actually the symbiotic relationship. And everyone is like, duh. What's even more powerful than this, I went backwards there. What's even more powerful than this is that when the help giver is giving you help, the help seeker has to do what we call reflective reframing, which is when the compliance officer says to you, that's not allowed. If we do that, we'll get sued. You don't walk away from there going, this company sucks. See, that's why you can't work, you can't do innovation inside large organizations. These corporate compliance people, they don't get it. They're going to get disrupted by Facebook. What you then do is go, okay, so we're not allowed to do that because you're the creative, right? We're not allowed to do that. So how can we test this idea within the constraints that do not upset our relationship with legal and compliance? That is the right way to conduct yourself if you're going to be successful, because then they see you as a collaborative partner. And of course, all of this works if it's reinforced by the leadership within the organization and actually celebrated. So that's the totality of the framework. And I believe that on the reinforcement part is where the human resource function can really, really help. That's where the role of the human resource function can really be powerful. All right, so let's look at a couple of things that can reinforce this. My favorite one is where innovation sits on the chart. And I showed this at the HRO conference. And so what you typically find is that the innovator, there's a hip hop phrase that we call the man next to the man. The corporate innovator is usually the man next to the man or the woman next to the woman, right? It's like, they're called Chief Innovation Officer, but they report to the Chief Transformation Officer, who then reports to the CEO. And yet, just yesterday or 2 days ago, BCG just published a report that said all the CEOs, 83% of CEOs think of innovation as their most important growth priority. But the person they've appointed to be the Chief Innovation Officer sits 3 layers in the organization and only meets with the CEO once a year, right? And so at this conference, I was like, one of your functions as a CHRO is to move innovation up the food chain, give it power and legitimacy. And I remember a lady pulled me over at the end of the conference and was like, that's amazing that you say that, because I was just literally redesigning our organization yesterday, and I was recommending to the CEO that the Chief Innovation Officer be moved down to report to the Chief Technology Officer. So now I'm going to go back and change that. Right? So we need to have those conversations internally. Another thing that the HR function can help us is to grow the innovation team. The hardest thing to do when you're an innovator is to stop yourself from asking for everything at once, because the conversations are so hard, right? So you just want to ask for everything at once so that you don't have to ask again. You want finance to give you the $3 million, then you don't have to talk to them again. You want the HR team to give you all the people you need for the future so you don't have to talk to them again. But imagine if our HR system allowed us to build a small team at the beginning, and then they helped you grow that team. Then they helped you grow that team, right? There's a bank in the Netherlands where the HR function actually helped create a system where teams were seconded to the innovation lab, and they got a 50% pay cut, but a stake in the ideas they were working on. Fascinating, right? You can't do a 50% pay cut without HR getting involved. You can't move the team without HR getting involved. I literally sat in a meeting in the US 3 weeks ago where the HR function were actually saying, okay, we're going to move these 5, 6 people to explore this new idea, and then we're going to give the leader $500,000 to recruit their temporary replacement. And they got that signed off by the CEO. Those are the kinds of conversations that should be happening on an ongoing basis inside your organizations, and that cannot happen without collaboration across functions. I'm giving you all these examples just to kind of... Now, I'm not going to say it's easy, right? But go start a startup if you don't want to do it that way, right? So here's a final thought for you. And I love this quote. It's from Hobie Darling. I think it's now at Skull Candy or something like that, but he's the former GM of Nike Plus. They worked on the fuel band. And he says, when you work inside a large organization, you spend a lot of time lining up the cannons. You have to line up the sales cannon. You have to line up the legal and compliance cannon, because sometimes it's pointed at you. So you have to turn it around and point it out to the world. You have to line up the marketing cannon. You have to line up all these cannons. But the advantage of the work of lining up the cannons inside a large organization is if you succeed and they go off with a big bang, something that startups can't do. And so the work of lining up the cannons is actually your work. Now, a lot of you probably took your roles because you thought you were going to be working on ideas. Sorry to disappoint you. You will only spend 5% of your time working on ideas. The majority of the time, you are a politician. If you're a corporate innovator, you're a politician. Right? And that's what I will leave you with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tendai. I love that last quote. All right, we have a few minutes for questions, so keep them coming in the app. Let's start with, so are we maturing from a pirate in the Navy to being one of those people in a village that know everyone and get along with everyone?
Yes, that is true. Yeah, we're more like, what's everyone's favorite pirate? Jack Sparrow. That's who we've become. We've become famous pirates that everybody loves. Yes, absolutely.
And how do we structure that?
So it's fascinating, right? At the end of Pirates in the Navy, the book, go get it, Amazon.com. At the end of Pirates in the Navy, the book, I tell a story of why I used the phrase pirates in the Navy, and it was about the difference between different kinds of pirates. And I talk about like buccaneers and different kind of pirates. And then I introduce the term, I don't introduce it, I just talk about privateers. And privateers were pirates, but they were pirates that had a commission from the government. And one of the most famous privateer, his name is Sir Francis Drake. He was even knighted by Queen Elizabeth. And these people were called Queen Elizabeth's pirates. And what they used to do is they used to represent England on the high seas, and they had a letter called the Letter of the Marquis that they could use to make deals and things like that. This was not legit business. It was criminal activity. But it was criminal activity under the cover of a government. So when they came back from whatever they were doing, there was always somebody there waiting to celebrate their success and give them knighthood. And the question for you is, who is waiting to celebrate your success? That's the real question. And so the structure is these things I was showing you: conversations with finance, conversation with legal and compliance, conversation. Those are the conversations that you have to, so you can build a system for celebrating your successes.
And you spoke about internal cross-functional collaboration. So how would this work when working with multiple partners in an ecosystem, so a village of villages?
Working with multiple?
Partners in an ecosystem.
Like other organizations? Is that the question? Or, okay. So the question is, where does the village gather? What is the plaza? Is that what you call it? In Italy? The square? Yeah, yeah. Where is the village square? Right? That's how you collaborate. You have to create the village square. And then you bring in the partners to collaborate with each other in the village square. If you go and like individually talk to each partner separately, then you're creating all these multiple confusing conversations. And so when we work inside organizations, one way that we create the village fair is to get aligned on an innovation framework that has stages and criteria that all the leaders use to make decisions. And then the innovation board that is using these shared criteria all sit together from the different functions. So now we're creating a town square. And then the individuals that want investment decisions come together to the square. So whenever you're like working with multiple partners, figure out a way of like, how do we create a village square where everybody comes together, and how do we actually drive those conversations of collaborating with each other?
And how do you scale it or make it even bigger?
How do you scale it? I don't know. It's usually already at scale. That's just typically, like, or once you have the CEO, the CHRO, it's pretty much like, often I find that the harder thing is to make it small. Yeah. It's actually to start small and then grow it. Because as soon as people know this is happening, a lot of people actually start jumping in. Yeah.
Thank you. And large companies often fall in love with process to protect what makes them successful and then lose the ability to stay aware of the environment. So how would you address that?
So it's interesting, right? I love that question because it's the human question that we often get. And IDEO, the famous company, they answered that question in the most fascinating way. Well, one of the things people say is if you create structure and process, it's going to stifle innovation. Right? That's what people say. That's what they say. But here's what's fascinating. Have you ever heard of predictably irrational? Have you heard of that concept before? So predictably irrational means human beings are not rational. They're irrational. But they're not irrational in a random way. We're all irrational in pretty much the same way. We're actually predictably irrational. When presented with certain options, we make the same irrational decisions. We don't make the rational decision, but we make the same irrational decisions. And that's the same thing for creativity. We literally know how to boost creativity. We literally know how to improve design through process. One of the worst ways to do a brainstorming workshop is to have a guy in front of the room going, tell me your ideas. And then they're writing them on the wall, right? Like, you, what's your idea? You, what's your... That's the worst way to do brainstorming. We know that. So we structure the brainstorming process differently. Write down your own ideas quietly by yourself for 3 minutes. Share your worst idea, just to break the ice so people get comfortable. Everybody gets a chance to share. Now share the idea that you think the company would never work on. Then everybody gets to share that. And then share your favorite idea. So we've structured the process for brainstorming, which means that you can structure the process for exploring the environment. So you can learn. You can structure the process for finding new ideas. You can structure the process for collaborating with startups. You can structure the process for open innovation. We saw that just now. You can design these things. That's creativity by design. I think is even the book called that, right? You can do all these things. Structure and process don't stifle innovation.
Beautiful answer. Thank you so much, Tendai. It's been great having you here today.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.